What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddie Hudak, and I am here breaking down the final non-conference game for Tulane in their 2023 season. Another 1-0 victory in their 36-7 win over the Nicholls Colonels. It's safe to say if a game personified the good, the bad, and the ugly, probably was the one that we saw this last Saturday. I wouldn't necessarily say that Tulane won ugly, but it wasn't necessarily the prettiest 4 quarters of football that I've seen in a long time. The bad, I guess you could say, is it's unfortunate when you feel like you really outmatch an opponent in pretty much all levels of the game, and then doesn't really go that way on the field. But there was never really a sense of, oh, Tulane's going to lose this ball game at any point in time. They were a little sloppy. They were a little rusty with Michael Pratt. And it was a question of whether or not he was going to play going into this matchup. And as much as you didn't see the rust in the first game, and my thought was, again, you don't have a preseason in college. We've seen this guy come cold off the bench in his first career start, but there's definitely something to be said about running around with a pretty immobilizing knee brace. You could see it in the way that he couldn't slide. I was going to say slid with quotations, but it just really made that ability near impossible for him. And that's just kind of a difficult task when you take off and all of a sudden you kind of have to get down head first. So I'm glad that those kind of kinks got worked out. So now that you're heading into conference play, looking to run the table, defend your title, which is first for Tulane in the AAC, probably better to get that rust off in this last matchup. And the defense probably has several plays that they would want back. But I liked what Willie Fritz said after the game, where the biggest quality when Corey Glore asked him that he likes in this team after this first month of play, his immediate answer was, well, I like the fact that they weren't satisfied with this win and that there were some pretty disappointed guys in that locker room, and reminding them that we still got the W, and just pointing out that the coaching staff's a bunch of perfectionists, that the players are a bunch of perfectionists as well, knowing they didn't play their best. But he also made a point to say as well that he appreciated how much all of the players wanted to make sure that everyone got into the game. So when I was rewatching it, there was only a certain point where I was really watching carefully any longer, but you saw depth chart pieces step up. You saw the defensive line be able to absorb the loss of Devin Deal for a half, which, when that's your starting defensive lineman, easier said than done. And yes, again, it was an FCS opponent, one that I thought played with a lot of moxie, and their quarterback was better than I had anticipated. And I also think that it's just jarring when you're playing left-handed quarterbacks. Just the way they drop back is different. The way that their release is, everything is kind of backwards. And it was just kind of hard for me to ignore that going throughout the game. But if you did make it to this game, which I do want to just shout out Tulane people, the student section, yeah, I know they left at halftime, but let's just get real here. This was a game that I really did not expect to see that filled. We expect usually when it's a lower opponent that this previous student body that didn't care about football, especially having to get those tickets in advance, we're all wondering how that kind of new ticketing system would work out for them. So to see that game was full to the brim on the student section before kickoff, that was such a surprise. It was loud in there, and people left. That always happens, but a lot of people stayed. And that really stuck out to me in how much of a difference this last season and now this year's making. And those that came to the game were lucky enough to witness Tulane history with Michael Pratt's 73rd touchdown pass to Lawrence Keys early in the game. He became the all-time leader in passing touchdowns at Tulane University. And then he quickly followed that up with another touchdown to Lawrence Keys, which was quite literally 2 feet in front of my face. It's really fascinating watching kind of the trajectory of a ball in the air and then suddenly realizing, oh, that's actually coming right down in my face. And all of a sudden I'm staring up at Lawrence Keys, who, again, just their chemistry is money to me. And I think that you saw some promise from a few players on offense that stuck out. And again, as much as there were a little bit of growing pains on both sides of the ball, special teams certainly won. And ultimately, it was a 1-0 victory that I think you could take a little more away from than one might expect. I kind of like starting these post-game breakdowns just going by the numbers. And I know, again, when it's an audio format or video format, there is only so many numbers that people are able to kind of hold in their head. At least this might be me projecting from my own abilities, but it stuck out to me a few things in this game. It was one of 2 games this year, the first game being South Alabama, where Tulane had less first downs than the other team. It was the only other game this year where They allowed more than one first down by penalty. They allowed 3 again in that first matchup to South Alabama, allowed 3 first downs to Nicholls by penalty in this game. They had 21 total first downs. But what stuck out to me was, while it was the most passing downs allowed with 14, and there were probably, again, some short yardage passes that, had the coverage been a little tighter, you might not have seen as many first downs happen or as much yardage in the air. But again, without disrespecting Nicholls, because I think that they came out and played one hell of a game, that their quarterback was, again, a really decent guy under center and able to use his legs, kind of similar to Michael Pratt, to really extend those plays and take off when he needs to as well. They allowed their first 50-yard rusher on the year, only 56 yards, but Colin Guggenheim finally pushed through that. But, when you run into teams like this where you're starting conference play next week, and we've heard a lot of the players, I remember Kai Horton saying before the Southern Miss game that he was just looking forward to actually having a game that he could prepare for and look at film, knowing that it was most likely going to be what they were going to see going into that game. Because if you remember, Ole Miss, they played Mercer, I believe, before them, and it was like a 73-7 or something blowout win, where how much are you really able to glean from that film? Whereas you had a little more games under your belt with Southern Miss. And so now Tulane is the one kind of racking up those games for opponents to look at, because again, Tulane is the, I don't know if it's is or are, I'm having a moment. They are the defending champions of the American Athletic Conference, and you have a ton of new teams looking in to, knock them off the top of the food chain. And so it's a question of whether or not they showed all of the looks. If we had seen, coverage that might be a little tighter when we get into conference play, it's really hard to say, but it was definitely a game where, again, you'd think that it would be a little more of a blowout. And if you look at the final score, it wasn't, an epic blowout, but again, it wasn't necessarily a game where you ever really got worried about whether or not Nicholls was going to be able to run away with the upset, especially the fact that Tulane just continued to capitalize off of turnovers. Yes, they had a few of their own. They lost a fumble and they had 2 interceptions, one each by Kai Horton and Michael Pratt, and neither of them were really great. It's hard to say, again, whether it was an issue by the receivers, but I've noticed that it is kind of the same route where either the quarterback underthrows or is perhaps expecting the wide receiver to cut back and make a play that way, and then the defensive backs just kind of cut underneath and are able to make those interceptions. But what stuck out to me the most was how much Tulane has been able to get turnovers and then actually capitalize on them in this matchup. It felt like the last couple of games, the defense would make this incredible play and then the offense would stall a little bit. And it's just a little disappointing when, again, those are coming off of turnovers by your defense. So Tulane's defense had 4 interceptions. I believe one was on third down by Jarius Monroe. You had one again from Lance Robinson. That's his 3rd this season. And it just seems like he is really itching for one every single game. You had Jesus Machado with, I believe, his 1st career interception. And then Gabe Liu at the end coming in off the depth chart to really just throw this, game towards the green wave with that 4th interception. The only time that Tulane kicked field goals was off of drives that weren't by turnovers. They were able to score touchdowns on all of those mistakes by Nicholls State. So that's an important thing to take away from this. It was the least first downs allowed by run on Tulane's defense. So yeah, you had a 50-yard rusher, but they only got 4 first downs by rush. It was mostly via, again, I believe it was 14 passing. The issue that really stuck out to me though was the penalties. Nicholls had 7 and Tulane had 9 penalties. It's not good. That's, again, when we talk about the principles that Willie Fritz says about his coaching philosophies, winning the rushing game, winning the turnover battle, winning time of possession, winning special forces, finishing in the 4th quarter, wave don't beat the wave. Most of those things worked out. They won the rushing battle. They won the turnover battle, although it was a 4-3 margin. Again, with those 2 interceptions and fumble for Tulane. They did lose the time of possession, but it was, 32 minutes to 27 minutes, not that big of a deal. It's the 9 penalties that stick out. There are 3 false starts. One was on special teams and one was late in the 4th quarter. So that again, when you're talking about depth chart pieces, it's kind of hard for me to think that much about them. But then you had 3 personal foul penalties, 1 holding, 1 offsides, and 1 defensive pass interference. Just really not, again, what you want to see, but it does just kind of feel, again, I hate to use the term playing down to your opponent, but it does just feel like when you are almost expected to win you oftentimes play, with that kind of mentality. So I really appreciated, again, Willie Fritz saying at the end of the game how disappointed these guys were. And again, when you win a game, you should be excited. But just to see that, again, they're all really striving to set that standard of perfection. The other thing, too, that stuck out, they did get 2 sacks on the night, but they allowed 3 sacks on Michael Pratt. And it just hasn't seemed like the offensive line has had necessarily the best couple of starts to the season. There was a little bit of switching going on at the guard positions. We noticed it several times. Josh Remetich was out for a few series. And then Corey said there was a point where he had seen Shadre Hurst, who went in for Josh Remetich, go to the other guard position at some point in the game. So I don't know if it was a question of injuries, if it was a question of just trying to try a few things out. I remember on the broadcast saying something about how when we started the year, we had talked to Willie Fritz and he had said that Mekhi Hughes was kind of the best pass protector. And so having the running backs kind of running out for those dump off passes, it said something about maybe, wanting them in the backfield to block. And he said something to the effect of, well, we shouldn't really need them back there. He's definitely correct. But again, I just think you're seeing still just that turnover effect of all that Tyjae Spears brought to the table. A lot of it was in pass protection. That's something that really stuck out at the Senior Bowl. And I think that's what got him on a lot of people's radars across the nation is that pass protection, super important as a running back. So maybe you use that a little bit more. We've seen them in the past bring in an extra offensive lineman, bring in extra tight ends to block. But then again, some part of your game suffers when you have to bring in someone from another place on the field. And so that's something that you definitely want to see get cleaned up leading into conference play. But again, when you're talking about a game where you have 9 penalties, you definitely didn't play your best football, you had 3 turnovers, you lost the time of possession, usually spells out a different end result than what we saw for Tulane, where again, instead we saw history. We saw what they technically called Willie Fritz's 200th career win as a head coach. Again, if you ask him in the post game, all of his junior college years added up to 200, a lot farther or a lot earlier than that. But between that and Michael Pratt making history, ultimately the important thing is walking away with the W. And the other thing too is third down. Tulane was 50% on third down, and they only allowed 2 of 11 third down conversions on defense. They did allow 2 fourth down conversions, but again, you are looking at a team that is allowing literally nothing on third down. And when you're talking about, again, going into conference play, getting the rust shaken off your quarterback, who is now the all-time passing touchdown leader in Tulane history. I believe he's not that far off from total yardage as well, and pretty high up there in the rushing category as well. And that's really where I'm going to focus, my commentary on the offense is to the deserving guy under center, Michael Pratt. Like I said, we can definitely get into the weeds of, how that game went down. Should it have been better? What can we kind of glean from it? What you can glean from it is that, you are witnessing history with a really special quarterback in Michael Pratt. And it's really been just a very crazy 3 seasons of football to go through where, again, you go 2-10 the first season, 12-2 last year. Now they're 3-1 this season. And, the conference is really theirs for the taking again. But I just remember when I got down to training camp, the leadership stuck out about Michael Pratt. And then, I remember we did a radio show for Tulane's Media Day that year. I did it with Gus Kattengale and our audio engineer, Jordan Kleber, who now works with us over on the Tulane games. And we did a radio show out of the Glazer Club. And we had, Nick Anderson come and sit down and talk with us and Michael Pratt. Remember asking him, did you play other sports growing up? Just kind of curiosity about that, hearing that he was a mobile quarterback and knowing that guys, tend to sometimes come from multi-sport backgrounds at that. And when he told me that he had not played football until 9th grade, I mean, honestly, my jaw almost dropped. To play quarterback and to play at the level that we have seen him play and to only have 9 years of experience at this point. Again, I literally can't do math to save my life, but there are guys that get put into these camps at peewee football ages and have these trainers. And especially when you're talking about quarterbacks. So to have someone come in, never play football until 9th grade, win the starting job at his high school. And then they told a really cool story during the broadcast about how he had originally committed to Toledo and that they were hosting some camp at Tulane. And Willie Fritz said that Michael Pratt paid for his own plane ticket and then Ubered over to campus for this camp that they were hosting. And he goes, you don't have to do this. We've already offered you a scholarship. And it just really speaks to his leadership ability, his competitive nature, and just how much he really lifts and inspires all of the guys around him. And I saw all of those traits in the 2021 year, even though we weren't really seeing it translate that much on the win column. I really felt like you could see the traits of a really good quarterback that just really wasn't getting any help from his offensive line and wasn't really, the playbook really just didn't seem to be playing to anyone's strengths in that year and not running the ball enough until really halfway through the season. Last year, you really saw them get back to their fundamentals, and you saw what he could do with a very different type of receiving group in Shea Wyatt and Deuce Watts and Tajay Spears for a lot of that, who obviously deserves a lot of credit on his own. But again, for all these questions of how is Tulane going to replace a generational running back, I think the answer lies less in the running back room and more in there's only so much that you have to worry about in that aspect, because you do have a quarterback like Michael Pratt under center. And again, to go back to the whole idea of rust and shaking that off, I mean, you could definitely tell that there was a little bit of rust that had to be shaken off, because again, when you talk about planning your foot, being able to do your dropbacks and all of that, having a knee brace on definitely hinders, I think, what would be your natural movement. And so to me, it just puts everything just a little bit off. And he's so used to being able to really navigate the pocket with his legs, a lot of lateral movement. A lot of the time he rushes up the middle, but he just is kind of lacking the ability to do so. Again, just not having the agility due to being kind of constrained by that brace. And then you could see how it affected him on, his complete inability to slide essentially. But you can't get a bigger competitor than you can in Michael Pratt. And I think, again, we can all go back to that Oklahoma game and really see one player just single-handedly refuse to lie down and die. He had a bloody nose at one point. He was just getting beat up to a pulp, and he just kept kicking. And I kicked myself because I unfortunately wasn't able to be at that game. But I just remember that whole season thinking, again, there's a reason that I'm unsurprised that everyone is sticking around. And I think a lot of that goes back to the leadership of the guy that they have under center. You saw him working people's cramps out during that training camp. He's just always so active, even when he's not playing. That sticks out to me more than anything, is how active he is in the huddles, in the games that he hasn't been able to play. He was a little quieter in the Ole Miss game. I think just kind of, again, being upset that he wasn't able to be out there. I don't also think there was people that had much energy to say that much with how overwhelmingly hot it was that week of the Ole Miss game. But it's unfortunate that he misses that kind of matchup. But again, the way that we've seen him come out there and just throw these absurd balls in the air. Last year was a lot more yards after catch ability. You've seen that quite a bit in a lot of the runs by Jaquan Jackson, Lawrence Keys, but you also have a quarterback that can comfortably throw, 50 plus yard downfield passes on a pretty regular basis. And just seeing how easy those touchdowns seemed. And as much as, again, we talk about the O-line having some issues in this game, that second touchdown doesn't happen without Rashad Green really clamping down Joe Mason, who was trying really hard to get another sack in on Michael Pratt on that play. But I just, again, the mental toughness by him, the way that we saw him play towards the final stretch of last year and do so with some injuries going on. And then, again, his ability to lift up Kai Horton, looking at how he ran over to him when he was upset after the Ole Miss game. But then you see Tyler Grubbs talking about that game, looking to Michael Pratt as a sign of leadership to really be able to emulate. And you just see how much he really means to this team. But again, to just be making history in the way that he does. And yes, he's a mobile quarterback, and he had, I believe, 7. He was the second leading rusher behind Arnold Barnes on the year, but he really goes through all of his progressions first. I've seen how hard he works every single offseason. There'd be times where I would go over to Yulman after spring camp to be, an interview or something that I was doing there. And every single time I was there, he was working out in the back practice field area, working on his footwork, working on his accuracy and his ball placement. And you can really see how much that paid off. And you just have to credit the kid for not going anywhere after the first year when they won 2 football games, and probably a good time again to get out of Dodge if you were thinking about it. And then last year gets, tampering and everything aside, gets some noise from these Power 5 teams. He decides to stay at Tulane and finish that out. And I think that just speaks again to the recruiting, the identity, the legacy that this team is leaving, but it really goes back to the leadership that they have at their quarterback role and the play that they have at that quarterback role. You can solve a lot of problems on a team with a really good quarterback under center. I remember Willie Fritz saying that to us in one of our offseason meetings heading into this year. And yeah, he's pretty correct. And when you have a quarterback that's playing hurt, that's still able to make throws like that, and not playing hurt in the sense that, it was a question of should he have been able to play from a medical standpoint, just a question of comfort. I think, again, playing with that brace. But then again, you saw a play where there was a defensive lineman just trying to pull him down by the other leg. And most people in that situation would probably think, all right, I'll just eat the sack here. He keeps trying to step forward, ends up completing a pass on that play. His ability to get passes off in the face of pressure in his face, his ability to read the field incredibly quickly. And again, when he makes that decision to tuck and run, it is after he's gone through his reads. He does not just scan one half of the field. He does not get super nervous with pressure in his face. And if anything, then you see his straight line speed really come into play. You've seen him convert now a third down going, which was a touchdown in that game, throw 2 touchdowns in the air, probably wants that interception back, but he's been pretty much near perfect the rest of this season. And so I just think going into conference play again with your starting quarterback, getting that rust out, it makes sense now. Hindsight is always 2020. There's a reason that we are commentators and not coaches. But just to see again, him get back in there, get his chemistry going again with the receivers, it stuck out to me how much he was going to guys like Chris Brazzell and Yulkeith Brown actually getting involved quite a bit in the offense as well. He's someone to me that has really come on strong, kind of quietly. And the way that they were using him with kind of those jet sweep motion plays reminds me a little bit of how they worked Lawrence Keys into the wrinkle of the game plan last season, where that was primarily what he would kind of come in on and do those sets. And then as the year went on and his chemistry with Michael Pratt grew, we started to see, his routes really form and go from there. But now you need someone that can do those routes from beforehand. You have Yulkeith Brown coming in and being able to do so. But Chris Brazzell, again, has just really stuck out to me as someone that hasn't really seen much playing time. He was hurt last year and he was really skinny last year too, but he has height that you just cannot coach up. And the times that he has made completions on third down in the red zone and has been the first and second look on several plays, it just, again, speaks to the coaching ability and just, again, how much depth they have at almost every position on the roster. There are definitely places where definitely more of a question mark than others. You think about the offensive line, someone goes down. We've seen them kind of work in Matt Lombardi, Trey Tuggle, Shadre Hurst at times, but ideally you'd like to keep your starters out there. Your running back room, I guess you could say you had another horse come out of that in Arnold Barnes. And he's been someone that we've all kind of really wanted to just get him out there and see what he could do. And I believe it was a 65-yard run that he broke away with where it looked like he kind of just like ran out of steam at the end or something happened. But, without that play, Tulane's running attack on the evening probably doesn't look as pretty. They had 150 net yards. Most of those came from that run from Arnold Barnes and quite a bit by Michael Pratt. But it also did stick out to me that this was the lowest rushing attempts that we've seen by Tulane all season. They rushed for 38 attempts in their first game, 45 against Ole Miss, 37 against Southern Miss, and then 28 against Nicholls. And 7 of those came from your quarterback. And I don't believe that they were designed runs. So there really wasn't that much to really get that much out of in the run game because we didn't really see those guys out there getting much action. Mekhi Hughes was in there. You saw them get a little bit more involved in the receiving game, though. Now we've seen several situations where Shawty Clayton Johnson has caught a pass, Mekhi Hughes, and that's something, again, that Tajay Spears really brought as an element to the passing game. So to see that kind of get worked in more, I'll be curious to see how much that comes out of an empty backfield versus having, them line up and then just kind of take that dump off pass because, again, it just kind of has been a little concerning with the amount of pressure that these quarterbacks have kind of had in their face. And knowing that Michael Pratt does have a hurt knee, you really want to make sure that you keep him upright as much as possible. And so if that means sacrificing those empty formation sets in order to make sure that he has additional protection or just keeping a tight end in there like that. But as much as we could see him make long throws in the air, getting the running backs and hopefully the tight ends a little more involved in the short passing game. This is the second week in a row now where Chris Carter has caught a pass. And yes, it was from Kai Horton, I believe, later on in the game. But he's someone, again, that I think you could see really come into a role as they get into the season. And, you have one game in conference play, then you have the bye week. So anyone that's banged up, you have time to nurse any wounds from the quarterback, from anyone that might be beat up in the running back room, the wide receiver room, same for the defensive side of the ball. But ultimately, I think that Tulane is in a good position to run away with 1-0 in conference play and then, like I said, rest up and get ready to really run the table. But they wouldn't be able to do so without Michael Pratt, what he's able to do on the ground and in the air. And it was just special to see him be able to do that in front of a packed crowd too on Saturday night. And again, both of those came in the first half, so still full student section. But that was my only thing. I'm thinking, well, what if he breaks the record and the turnout is a little, well, it just goes to show you, I think fans are paying attention. And I don't think it was lost on them that record was being chased. And the fact that they announced that Michael Pratt was starting on Thursday, made our broadcast job a lot easier, not having to kind of dance around that before I announced the injury report 15 minutes or so before kickoff. But what that really does is fill the stands. And I think Tulane kind of knows how to play the game a little bit now. And it paid off with a really loud reverberating roar for a very deserving quarterback. There's really, again, only so much diagnosing and takeaways that can really take from this. And I'm going to keep deferring to Willie Fritz's comments of definitely not a perfect game. But his favorite quality was how disappointed his team was in that final result, and ultimately having to remind them, you guys, we still won this game. It's still 1-0. That's really the important takeaway. But to see these players really feel that, and you see them feel it in the game, but to feel it in the locker room afterwards, again, when all things considered, a win is a win, but 4 interceptions just don't come out of nowhere. And it's not like it's not a precedent that we haven't been seeing set almost in every game this year. I believe there's been an interception in every single matchup, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe there wasn't one last weekend, but there were 7 pass breakups by the defensive backs. They had 3 more pass breakups in this game, but those interceptions coming from guys like Lance Robinson and Jarius Monroe, who you could tell Jarius Monroe, they had gone to that throw on the comeback earlier on in the game, and he's really, really good at those in-game adjustments. I had seen at one point him talking with JJ McCleskey, and right after that was when he made that interception. You could just tell that he remembered it from before. He was patient. He read the quarterback's eyes, broke on the ball the second it was thrown. Very similar in the way that Lance Robinson did on his interception. And again, that Jarius Monroe interception came on 3rd down. Several of these have come on 3rd down. And just Lance Robinson has just been all over the place. You saw Jesus Machado come in. Like I said, I believe it's his first career interception. And it was all at what would be important parts of the game where I think the end score might have looked a little different if they weren't able to kind of stop all of those series. And the fact that, again, Tulane scored points off of all of those turnovers in the form of touchdowns. Even though getting a field goal off a turnover is good, it's always, okay, well, you only got 3 when you could have got 7. Well, they got 7 several times, save for the one where they didn't convert on the 2-point conversion. They only had 6. But something I've been looking at all season long on the sideline, and I've been doing it in my reports, and it's just been something that has really been a point of interest to me, is who's going to really step up and be these new leaders. Because again, you still have Michael Pratt, you still have Sincere Haynesworth, but just to take people through what's going on in a game, the linemen are usually working again as a unit, talking to each other about things. And then Michael Pratt is either on a headset, talking with the offense, talking with the coaches down on the field, talking with his receivers, but there's only so much that they can really pay attention to in a game setting. Sure, you really saw those defensive leaders, I think, come on strong and really come across the field. And Nick Anderson and Dorian Williams are pretty much enough leadership to carry any team over the finish line. So I was just curious who would really step up into those leadership roles. And it's been a pleasant surprise almost every single week now. Like I said, I remember in the Southern Miss game where Josh Remitich came out, and it was less of a moment of pumping people up. It was actually kind of getting down on his guys and telling them that they needed to be better after Dan Rochar had kind of been a little more calm with them. And so it's just kind of interesting to see that contrast. It's been interesting to watch the coaching play styles too, and see kind of when they get a little harder on guys. Shield Wood was pretty hard on his defense in that first game and got on them a little bit after they blew that play in coverage and allowed that touchdown. You saw like a completely different reaction to the blown coverage touchdown after this last game. Prior to that, I remember it stuck out where Darius Swanson had allowed a completion. It wasn't like he allowed 20 yards in the air or a touchdown or anything, but he got really hard on himself after that. And I saw DJ Douglas go over to him on the sideline and tell him, ultimately you still made the stop. You might get an interception on the next play, but even though you allowed a completion, you didn't allow the first down. That's the important thing. Next time that'll be a pick. And it was just really good to see that leadership come from someone, again, that has been on the team, didn't see that much playing time last year. And the safety group was definitely a question mark that, again, I don't think is getting necessarily the attention that they deserve for what they've been doing out on the field, not just in coverage, but how many times they come down field to stop the run and make tackles. There was a key third down stop early in the game. I believe it was DJ Douglas, where there was a pre-snap motion going on with number 0 on Nicholls. And that was something that they really did all game long. And that was kind of an issue for the defense of who's carrying him, this, what have you. It was a play where DJ Douglas was over on the left side of the defense, and Bailey Despaney was the one that was covering 0. And when he ran over to the other side, you saw him communicate with DJ Douglas. He ended up dropping back. DJ Douglas came down a little more and went over to the right side of the field, but then he made the perfect pursuit in space and made that tackle. And again, this is the 4th game in a row where we have not seen cramping issues for Tulane. We have seen that first hit on tackles take guys down. Sometimes they take the incorrect angles, and you hear Willie Fritz talking about leverage and everything, but you've seen that safety group, to me, really step up and really make those key tackles in a way that you saw in Larry Brooks, Lummy Young, and Macon Clark. You've seen really great play from Cam Pettisclo in the slot as well. Another time during the game that stuck out to me was Dan Rochard was not happy with how the offensive line was playing and really kind of got on them after a series. Someone that has been very quiet is Shoddy Clayton Johnson. All of a sudden, he just kind of seemed possessed. And he got up right after that was over, and he went down the line and gave each one of them a high five and just kind of kept them mentally with their spirits up. You've seen Michael Pratt do that a lot as well. But to see, again, one of those running backs step into that leadership void for a unit that he's not even in, he doesn't play offensive line, but going over and making sure that that unit is good, it's really been just a pleasure on the sideline. And then the other time that stuck out to me the most was, again, that blown coverage touchdown. Very similar to what we saw them do against South Alabama, where after that play, there were some expletives uttered by Shield Wood, but it was mostly, you guys are better than this and you know it. And they really took that to heart and played like hell right after that. And you didn't have to hear him get on him again. I've noticed how little you've heard him get on them really ever since. And I gave this sideline report. By the time Corey comes down to me, just to give people context, it usually is easiest for me coming out of a commercial break after the punt or the kickoff, in that little downtime, in order to give my report. And so if you watched my first episode of this show where I explained my concussion memory issues and short-term memory loss, that's always a little bit of a challenge keeping what's going on in my head. And there were definitely been some audibles by myself where I've just completely blanked out on whatever I had intended to say. But I remember watching the sideline, and by the time they got down to me, I still hadn't seen Shield Wood go over to his guys. And by this point, again, the offense is taking the field. What I instead saw was I went over there. Lance Robinson is conducting a meeting on the sideline by himself, not by himself, but he's talking with DJ Douglas, Bailey Despaney. They're all working in tandem, drawing out the routes on the whiteboard. And like I said, by the time Shield Wood came over to them, they were pretty much done with this meeting that they held for themselves. And so, yeah, it wasn't the most clean secondary play that you would like to see. It was not the tightest coverage that you would like to see. There were a lot of kind of bend, don't break moments. And again, I'd say nothing personifies bend, don't break better than Lance Robinson, whose interception came after they converted on 3rd and 4th down and were kind of driving again. And he really makes that important stop. But he's been someone to me that has just stepped up in such a big way on the leadership side of things. You have it in guys like Jarius Monroe, but to see a player, like I said, basically holding a meeting of what went wrong and having the knowledge that they do, again, to be able to do these things. They had Rob Green, the anchors coach, come over, kind of confirmed what was going on with him as well, but they just have such an understanding of what they need to be doing out there. And so you understand why they're disappointed and hard on themselves in the locker room afterwards. But I just feel like this is the most mental toughness, especially out of a secondary unit where the nature of the role is high flying emotions, really big highs, really big lows. The most important quality in a defensive back, short-term memory loss. You just have to move on to the next play. And I'll tell you, my first year, that was very difficult for them to do. There were a few games last year, and it sticks out to me, the Southern Miss loss was the most frustrated, uttered explicitly on the sideline, not to each other, but really just kind of towards themselves. And that kind of got me worried in that game that ultimately ended up being a loss. And we were talking about their coverage being blown a little bit again in that South Alabama game, but I remember just how calm they stayed and how they responded right after that. And they did the same thing in this game. And you just get the sense that you have, again, real leaders that have seen real highs, real lows in guys like Lance Robinson, who was there for the 2-10 season and there for the 12-2 season. But to have these leaders really step up on the sideline, it's one of my favorite things about my role is my ability to do that. It's been interesting, though. I have noticed a byproduct of the quote unquote shortened game times that have essentially just meant more timeouts. If nothing else for my job, it's been able to allow me a lot more time in these huddles than I otherwise felt like I was able to do at different points last year. I also have Mackenzie Mitchell again on the sideline helping me out quite a bit with that. But ultimately, I've just noticed that I have a lot more ability to really poke into these huddles. And it's hard for me to hear a lot of the time what they're saying. And so I just kind of look for body language, and I look for, again, what players are stepping up. You see it on the field. This is the 4th week in a row that a linebacker has led this team in tackles. Talking about a team, again, that lost Nick Anderson and Dorian Williams, and that was their biggest question mark. Then they lose Pratt in week 1. Tyler Grubbs is the leading tackler against Ole Miss. Jesus Machado against Southern Miss. 2nd week in a row for Jesus Machado, and that's really good for him, as well as, again, his first career interception. And then the guys that are rounding that out are guys like Bailey Despaney and Lance Robinson, Jarius Monroe, guys on the defensive line. It's just really, again, all around this defense. The fact that they, again, could lose Devin Deal for targeting, and it really just didn't matter. And you get the sense that it wouldn't really have mattered who the opponent was, because you've seen them rotate on almost every single series, multiple of those guys, and it's really paying off in their ability to affect the quarterback. It was interesting, again, watching them go up against a left-handed quarterback. It does look really weird, and you could kind of see them having to adjust to whatever those tendencies were. But Devin Deal goes in the second half and immediately makes a play, and it just shows you how ready these guys are, how hungry they are. And I think you're really going to see that all play off when they kick off conference play. Most important thing is a 1-0 W, and the Green Wave got that. And again, head into conference play, 3-1 on the season. They'll be playing UAB this Saturday at home at 11 a.m. It's the Hall of Fame game. I've brought him up a bunch of times on this show, but Todd Graffinini will be honored as well as the rest of that class. And I'm excited. My dad's coming in town. This is the first time that he'll be seeing me do my sideline job. Then we're going to the Saints game. It's actually the first time we'll attend a football game together, which I didn't realize we had never done. Been to a ton of Warriors games, but wasn't a 49ers fan growing up. And so that just really never happened for us. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to seeing Michael Pratt continue to break records and make Tulane history, watch the leadership on this team and the identity of this team really grow by the week. And then again, you head into your bye week, you get some health, you get some rest, and then run the table on conference play. Doesn't seem half bad to me. So with that, y'all, I will see you on Friday.